All right, thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's the last webinar of the series, so thanks for hanging in there and getting through so many of them, and good to see so many of you tonight. So tonight, just for what it's worth, for those of you who have done a lot of the webinars so far, there will be a little bit of stuff, like this is a very comprehensive webinar, so there will be a lot from random ones you might have seen, but that's the goal, is to make sure we're covering everything we can. So, all right, without further ado, let's pop in. So I want to jump in, as I always do, to the components of a college application, because I think it's important to understand what colleges really value, and therefore kind of how you spend your time junior year. A lot of that kind of depends on this. So the high school academics is the biggest, even though it's 25%. The reality is, if something else is amazing, it'd be better. This is my own pie chart, it's not official. But the idea with the high school academics is that your grades, the course rigor, like, are you taking honors? Are you taking APs? How many are you taking compared to your classmates, right? Those types of things kind of fall into high school academics, which will be the first thing we talk about here momentarily. Standardized test scores, it's at 25%. Obviously, at schools like the UCs, where they are test blind and do not consider test scores, that is not accurate. But there are some schools that went back to test required after the test optional phase, and for them it's huge because it proves how much they cared about them and valued them. So we'll go into that more later as well. Extracurricular activities, here's the thing, there are very few schools that if your grades aren't solid, that your extracurricular activities will pull a ton of weight. But if you have solid grades, what gets you in, I would say it's your test scores and your GPA and course rigor and all of that that gets you looked at and considered. It's your extracurriculars, your essays, your letters of rec, things like that get you in. All right, so we'll break all of those things down as we go through this. One thing I also want to note is that, based on, thank you all for submitting your questions ahead of time of things you want to cover today. But just for everyone here, we have people with very different goals, very different expectations. So, there are some people here who are asking what they need to do to apply to Stanford, Harvard, Yale. There are other people asking, if they think that four-year colleges are out of reach, how does community college factor in? They're all great questions. I'm going to do my best to answer everything, but just know that sometimes I will try to always clarify if I'm who I'm talking to, because I don't want to panic people when I'm saying how many APs you need if you're not applying to Stanford, Harvard, Yale. But I don't want those Stanford, Harvard, Yale kids thinking they can get away with none. So we'll go over all of that. Okay, like I said, high school academics. So this for colleges is how you compare to your classmates. This is the point, right? What happens is, if you go to a high school that has a lot of grade inflation, or candidly grade deflation, which exists, it's not common. But the idea is, how do you compare? So your GPA compared to another school's GPA, it's kind of irrelevant, right? You can have an amazing GPA at your school if your school weights every single class and gives huge bumps or rarely gives Bs. But if you go to a school like Pali that actually does make things more challenging, it's very easy to get a C, D, or candidly even an F at Pali. So GPA and kind of course rigor and how you compare to your class are all factored into what they're looking at. So just to differentiate between these, because at the end of the day, that's kind of the same thing. But the idea is that GPA and grades, right, is like A's compared to B's, B's compared to C's. I have people all the time and in this ask, what GPA is a good GPA. It depends on where you're applying, right? The beauty of the internet is that you can Google any school and say, what is the average GPA? However, that doesn't give you much information, because contextually, you don't necessarily know, is that weighted or unweighted? Usually they don't say. You don't know, if you're factoring in all these schools with grade inflation. There's a lot of factors. This is where Naviance comes in, which I believe Pali gives you guys access to in the second semester for juniors. But I believe that's correct. So that's when you have access to Naviance, which is a lovely thing that you guys have with resources, like gives you the GPA from Pali kids who've applied to these certain schools. So you can look at UC Santa Barbara and say, okay, what's the average GPA coming out of Pali that gets in? What's the lowest GPA that's ever been accepted? What's the highest, right? And you could do it for any college. So Naviance is a great way to kind of get a sense of, within your school, what GPAs are necessary at different colleges. And again, that's called Naviance. Now, course rigor, when you're applying to more competitive schools. So if we're looking at top 50 schools, we'll say, course rigor matters a lot more. If you're looking anything under that, course rigor is always good, But this means, like, would you rather take an AP class or an honors class or a regular class? If you're applying to schools that aren't in the top 50, definitely if they're not in the top 100, but if they're not in the top 50, most of them would rather see A's. They don't need to teach too much of a challenge. They're happy with kids who can just do well at basic high school classes. The more competitive the schools get, the more they care about how much you're challenging yourself, how much you can juggle and balance, and therefore how many honors, APs, etc. This is up to you. Again, we always get questions of how many is enough. There's no such thing. If you're applying, we'll pick on the Stanford, Harvard, Yale people right now. If you're applying there, there's no such thing as enough, because you're up against kids who are the best in the world. And so you have people, like I've seen people apply who took 6 APs junior year, but then also took 3 or 4 AP exams at the end of junior year in classes they never even took, and they just self-prepped for these AP exams. And then they're applying with, insane GPA, all these AP exam scores that are amazing, and credits, and et cetera. So course rigor, it depends on where you're applying, how hard it needs to be. One of the questions that we also, I would say, get regularly, and you will hear it almost every info session you go to at colleges, is it better to get an A in an AP class, an A in a regular class or a B in an AP class? And the answer at any of the top 25 schools for sure is going to be an A in an AP class. They don't want a B in an AP class, and they don't want a regular class when an AP was an option. So this, again, it's not like if you get a B, your life is over at those schools, but they are looking for the kids who don't necessarily have them, right? And again, we're talking about the best of the best, the top most competitive schools. Again, a B is not going to be the death of you. It's just you need to show them that you can hack it, because the reality is, think of APs, they are college level classes. So if you can do well in an AP class, in a college level class, you're minimizing their risk of accepting you. You're giving them more and more evidence that you can handle college level coursework. Because if they can look at you and say, she already did like multiple, college level classes and did great, awesome, then you're good to go, right? You're looking like not a liability. You're not going to walk on campus and flunk out. On the other hand, if you've taken all regular classes and you get straight A's, but you've never taken a college level class, they're worried that you might get to the school, if it's competitive and more rigorous, that you're not ready to handle that workload. So that's the other kind of hidden agendas behind the APs and honors. Class rank, kind of touched on that a minute ago, but the idea of class rank is, how do you compare to your classmates, right? So your GPA only means so much. The context of your high school is what determines the value of your GPA. So again, the example I always give is that I worked with a high school where a girl with a 3.68 was bottom 25th percentile at her high school. That is not, it doesn't mean anything bad about her. It just means that everybody at her school has great grades. And candidly, it was the school where everybody gets to retest all the time, and your grades are never finalized. You can test again. You have extra credit. You have this. Colleges know that. They see, even if your school doesn't formally rank, they see the other GPAs. They see kind of the range of your graduating class. They see the last year's graduating class. This is stuff you can Google Pali High class profile, and you can see kind of the information that colleges generally have on hand or have had in years past. So they know how hard it is to get a certain GPA at your school. That's what class rank does. This is also, all of this ties together with, if you are at, obviously most if not all of you are at Pali, but if you're at a school like Pali that has 1 million APs, they are keeping in mind, like, how are you challenging yourself compared to everyone else? So if you are taking 6 APs as a junior and no one else is taking more than 4, that's amazing. But if you're taking 0, where 70% of your classmates are taking at least 1, it's not as great, right? But again, it all depends on where you're applying. So if you are applying to, again, not the top 25 or top 50 schools, don't stress about this as much. It's when you're applying to those more competitive schools that all of this starts to really matter. All right. So we've kind of touched on some of the basics of why it looks good, shows that you're capable of college level coursework. But part of it is also that it's just more common. So more and more people are doing it. I mean, I think parents, you can look back when you were in high school. I look back when I was there, it's like, it was really impressive if you took 2 or 3 APs in a given year. Most people didn't do that. And only a small fraction of the class even took any APs. Now it's getting higher and higher. And so 2022, they're expecting to be about 1.5 million, right? So it's just going up. Is the idea is that if more people are doing it, this is one of those times peer pressure isn't the worst thing. But if more people are doing it and you don't, you might be at a disadvantage at certain schools. So recognize that it's just getting more common. Doesn't mean you have to do it. And if you're not doing it this year, You can do it next year. You don't ever have to do it. It's up to you. Everybody has their own path. But here are the courses that are available. Pally has the vast majority of these. This is the awesome thing about your school. So if you look at this list, you can see that, some of these, if you're already on the AP track, you've probably taken a number of these, whether it's last year or this year, but a lot of these are going to be senior level classes that are available that weren't available this year or before. So just take a gander at this, see what's in here that you might be interested in pursuing. And if you've never taken an AP and you're looking at senior year, look at these and go, well, I might be interested in this, or this actually sounds kind of cool. Even and if you're applying, for instance, you want to be a psychology major, take AP Psych, right? Because they are going to look, if you have AP Psych at your school, even if that's the only AP you take, if it's available and you don't take it, it demonstrates either that you're not that interested or that you're afraid of the level of it. So when in doubt, try at least to take a couple and the things you're most excited about. AP scores. So this is, all right, this is one of the biggest misnomers. I think I hear so many students tell me, but they got an A in the class, it doesn't matter what they get on the test. That is just patently false. So if you look at these scores, just to kind of break down, remember, again, we're thinking of it as a college level class, right? It's out of 5. If you get a 5, it's like getting an A, right? You got an A in a college level class, everyone's super impressed. You get a 4, the vast majority are impressed, pretty much everyone, but it's not as impressive as a 5. Every school that accepts credit for APs accepts a 5. 95 to 99% accept 4s. 3s, it gets a little iffy. We'll come back to 3s. 1s and 2s, no one takes. 1s and 2s, you basically failed. You got a D or an F, right? So if you get a 1 or a 2 on an AP score, you do not submit this. This is not something that is going to go to colleges. We're going to pretend you were sick that day. It does not show up on your application. 3s are challenging though, because 3, if you are applying to, again, a standard good school, top 100, they love 3s, right? The majority of schools offer credit for 3s, the vast majority, to be honest. To them, it's good enough, right? It's you passed the class, you did well in a college level class. If you are applying to a top 25, especially top 10 school, 3s are not great, right? They have kids who are mainly 5s, might have a 4. So the reason I bring this up is that you get to choose which scores you send to colleges. So again, we pretend you're sick, you don't send the 1s or 2s. 4s and 5s you always send. 3s, for the vast majority of colleges in the US, you will send 3s. If you are applying to those super competitive schools, it's kind of up to you, because if you don't submit it, it might imply you got a 1 or a 2, right? They could assume the worst. But if you do send it, you're showing them you got a 3. And one way to think of this entire process, you are trying to give them 0 reasons to say no. Everyone thinks of like, what can I do to make them say yes? At a certain point, you want to do enough right that they don't look at it and go, well, she didn't do X, or he didn't even try this. You're trying to do as much as you can so that compared to someone else, I was like, oh, good. A 3 at Stanford is not going to be that well received. So it's just up to you. There is no right or wrong answer. That's just kind of your perspective and what you want to share. But that's it. So on this note, with APs and how many you should take, because I know we'll get asked this down the line, it's questions at the end. How many AP classes you should take for top schools. So keep in mind, we're only going to be talking about, let's say, top 25 right now. Nothing below that in the rankings. And by the way, I use this loosely. I think US News and World Report is kind of a crock on a certain level. And so is, Forbes and all the rankings, but there's also a prestige level to it. It generally correlates somewhat with, the admissions requirements to get in, GPA, acceptance rate, et cetera. So that's the reason I refer to it that way. But the way to think of like the number of APs, what we see for most of our kids, the students we work with who do go to top 25 schools, most of them took 1 or 2 sophomore year. You can't generally take much more than that. So you're doing what you can when it's available to you. You're always going up, by the way. That's one of the other big things. So if you take 1 or 2 sophomore year, you want to take 2 or 3 at least junior year, if not 3 or 4, right? And I will say most people who apply to those top schools are more like 3 or 4, probably not 2 junior year. And then senior year, you go up again, and now you're at 4 or 5. And this is where, again, we're talking top 25, it's the most competitive schools in the country. It gets to be a lot, but you're always showing, nailed it, I'm going to add more to this. However, if you don't do well in an AP class, if you bomb the exam, you have, a grade that isn't good, or it takes so much of your time, you can't do well in other classes. And if you were taking 3 junior year, you overshot, and you want to take 3 or even 2 senior year, it's fine, but recognize it does send a message that it was too much for you, which is not always the message you want to send to colleges when you're telling them how many college level classes you can take. So be aware, like I said, try to take as many as you can, but it's only you as the student. Parents know a lot. Student, you know the most about what you can actually handle, right? So it's always about taking as many as you can, and this goes for honors, APs, anything, as many as you can, and still not crack, not have a complete meltdown, not have your grades suffer, not have your mental health suffer. You've got to find that balance of what you think you can handle. As for the grade in an AP class, so if you get an A, and this is why the scores and the grades matter, because just like we talked about, the grades reflect how you compare to your classmates. Your AP scores reflect how you do compared to the country, right? And everyone else. So they want to see in your class, and by the way, remember, every college is usually getting a good number of applications from your classmates. So they're seeing more and more from your grade. So they want to see how you're doing in that class compared to everyone else. But keep in mind, grades and in high school or anywhere are subjective to a certain extent, right? You can have a teacher who loves you, who decides to round up, a teacher who hates you and refuses to round up, somebody that you missed an assignment and they waived it, somebody who missed an assignment and gave you a 0 and it killed your entire grade for the semester. There's a lot of things that can factor into a grade that maybe doesn't reflect your overall level of competency in a certain field. AP scores then balance that, but it goes the other way around, right? You could get an AP score of a 5, but if you're the only one in your class who got a 5, that's even more impressive, right? But it's also, to me, if you had to pick one, the AP score matters more because that's the standardized against the country how you did. The A shows that the teacher either liked you, maybe it was an easy class, maybe they didn't even teach to the test. Maybe that's why your AP score is a 2, is that the teacher just put on Finding Nemo every day in AP biology, right? Then that they can kind of tell that. So just know, again, an A in an AP class is great, but your AP score matters probably even more. All right, so as we were just talking about, standardized test scores, how do you compare to the country? So this is AP exams. I only weighted less than SAT, ACT, because again, at certain schools like the UCs, this is factually incorrect, but it's because not all kids take APs, right? So for the kids who do take APs, this can carry a lot more weight. But I didn't want it to look like, oh my gosh, if you haven't taken a ton of APs, you're screwed. So SAT and ACT, we're going to talk about this in this lovely world that we're in. So as a junior, you may have finished testing, you may be thinking about it, you may be in the midst of prepping. We'll talk about the terms of colleges and kind of what factors in for you in deciding whether to test, where to send scores, things like that. So here are the 3 terms that you're going to see when you're looking at colleges. Test optional, test blind, and test required. So test optional, you determine whether it's going to improve your application. The parallel I always give is schools do this with art portfolios a fair amount, right? So me, I'm a horrible artist. If I drew stick figures and sent that to them, that would not be impressive. I would take no thank you to the art supplement and the art portfolio. This is how testing should be, right? If this can benefit your application, don't be lazy. Take the test, prep, do well, get a good score. It gives them more information and more reasons to say yes, right? They're also not comparing you to somebody else who did take the test and has a great score and looking at you who didn't, where it could be that you're bad at testing. It could also just be that you're lazy. So when in doubt with test optional, if you have a great score, you always send it. But if it's not going to benefit you, let's say you have an insane GPA, you have a 4.3 GPA, 4.4 GPA by the time you're done with junior year, and you can't break a 1300 on the SAT. Even if you get to 1400 is nowhere near kind of comparison where your GPA is. You'd have to have something stellar. So to test optional school, you might go test optional and say no thank you to testing, right? But again, if you have a lower GPA, and a lot of this is based on what the school averages are, the college averages. So if they're looking for a 3.8 and you have a 4.3, you don't need scores. You're going to be so much above their average that they're going to be delighted to have you, right? But if you are significantly below, then you need scores that are above average to try to balance that out. So that's the thing with test optional. It's also worth noting, I always like to bring this up, test optional schools, whatever range they give you, kids only give whatever's published online in the FIS guide. Well, FIS guide actually stopped including test scores, but any books, anything you find, test optional schools, whatever range they give you, if they say that they accept usually a 27 to a 30, kids look at that and go, well, I wouldn't submit it if I'm on the low end. I'm only going to submit if I'm on the high end. So then they only submit if they're maybe 29, 30, or even higher, which means the next year, the average jumps. So you'll notice with test optional schools, the average keeps moving up year by year. It's because kids are only sending their scores in if they're on the high end of the average. So it's a self-perpetuating mess kind of on that. Test blind. This is just scores won't be considered. Doesn't matter. You could get a 1600. They do not care. They will not see it, right? UC's, Cal State's. By the way, if you look at the examples on here, it's fairly regional. There are exceptions. There are other ones that are more on the East Coast or in the Midwest, but the vast majority of test blind schools are in California. And specifically, when you go outside of the state schools, the private schools that are doing it are primarily in Southern California. So at this point, it's a very kind of regionalized thing, but you know, LMU still hasn't dropped. At USC certainly hasn't given up the test. They're still test optional. You have a lot of schools that are not test blind, but there are more here than anywhere else. So if you want to stay in the LA area, you have a lot of great options. But interestingly, like Pitzer has gone test blind, which is one of the Claremont colleges. The other Claremont colleges have not. So everyone has their own perspective. And I always point out that a lot of this depends on who's running admissions and administration at that school. If it's somebody who's a little old school, who was a good tester themselves and has always put value in test scores, they're going to make sure it's required or at least optional. If it's somebody who feels like it's not a good judge, it's biased, it's, you know, they weren't a good test taker, but they were smart, they're more likely to have their school go test blind or test optional on the other side, right? So there's just not always rhyme or reason. A perfect example is Caltech and MIT. So if you had to think of two schools that academically are really similar and how competitive they are, what they're looking for in candidates, Caltech is test blind. They will not look at scores. So again, you have a 1600, no one cares, no one knows. MIT went back to test required. They hated test optional. So Georgetown and MIT are the most kind of well-known ones that have gone back to test required, but a lot of Georgia public universities, Florida public universities, there's a lot of talk of like UT Austin and some of those probably going back next year. The challenge here is that as juniors, you're right on the cusp because most schools have only announced policies through 2023, meaning graduation year. So this current senior class, everything's obviously been decided. It was like in COVID, everyone announced like it's a 3-year trial run. But again, MIT and Georgetown said it was a 3-year trial run. They hated it. They dropped the trial part and went back to test required. After 2023, so not next summer, this coming summer, as juniors, rising seniors at that point, you may have a lot more that go either way. There may be more test blind schools. There may be more test required schools. You just don't know. And what it really depends on is, are they getting the class they want? And then once they get the class, how are those kids doing when they get to campus? So, you know, obviously your seniors right now, the colleges aren't going to be able to kind of ascertain how they did. They're going to have only been there for a month or two by the time you're applying. But the kids who are a year or two older than you, who were test optional and didn't submit test scores, were they amazing? Or were they lacking abilities that the college thinks they used to get in students when they had test scores required? So this is the thing. So when people ask, should they test? Does it matter? How do we know? You don't know. And so generally what we recommend, the rule of thumb is test, get the best score you can possibly get, have it in your back pocket. So when it comes time to apply, you can send it places. Now, again, if you have an amazing GPA and are a horrifically bad test taker, maybe not. But for everybody else, if you put effort in, if you just focus and spend the time on it, get the thing that's the best for you. It may not go everywhere. You may not send it to your reach schools, right? Maybe you only send it to your safeties and targets, but maybe that increases your chances to get in or to get a scholarship because it's good enough for certain schools. This is the way to think about it, is that you're not trying to pick a score that goes to everywhere. Because if you're looking at top 25 schools, most of those schools want to see a 34 or 1500 at this point, right? So if you have a 1420, you wouldn't send that to Duke or to one of the Ivies or to Stanford or wherever, but you would send it most places in the country, right? So you might have those top reaching ones. So just don't eliminate standardized testing because you're looking at some going, well, I'll never score this. Don't forget to look at your targets and safeties and go, well, this could actually help me at a lot of other schools. And there are some scholarships, not necessarily school-specific scholarships, but external scholarships that are more private based that do want test scores. All right, let's talk about the difference. So if for those of you who've already picked a test or already completed prep and testing, go get more water, whatever you need to do. But just to kind of break down the differences. So if you have not started test prep and you're considering it, the number one thing you have to do is pick which test plays to your strengths. So if you are somebody who's very meticulous, very careful, can think through like more word problems, SAT might benefit you because it moves slower. You have more time per question. The questions are generally a little bit more nuanced. So you have to be paying attention. You have to be thinking about what they really mean, especially on reading. And even the math is testing more real world concepts. So it's a different type of test. ACT moves very quickly and it's pretty straightforward. So the pacing is usually the hardest part for kids on the ACT. Math is more straightforward of math. So it's usually if you know it or don't, it's there. SAT is more like they give you a lot of like, so-and-so's doing their tax returns and here's what how would you fill this out? Or, there's one recently that kids hate, which shows the little sticker that's on car windows in a car dealership. And it's like miles per gallon on highway as opposed to city driving. They put stuff like that on the test. So it's more really problem solving and thinking. ACT is, do you know this math? Reading is also more straightforward on ACT, but again, moves much faster. The biggest difference between these two tests is the math and reading. So reading on ACT, there is a right answer. Line 27 answers number 13, right? It is in the text. On SAT, not necessarily. There's a lot on SAT that is what's the best answer. So two of the answer choices might be correct. One of them is better. And that's what they're looking for. So I always say, I'm an English major. I love reading. I hate SAT reading. And I think it's easy to argue with the test. Some people have a very natural kind of knack for this test, but most people don't. And so the ACT is more straightforward. The big difference between the math, other than just the straightforward versus kind of real world applications, is the fact that SAT has a no calculator section. So you're doing all hands by hand, long division sort of stuff for problems. And it has grid ends, which means that's where you're like writing in like 1, 4, 7 as your answer. It's not multiple choice. So they have a bunch of that on SAT. It's like the last 5 to 8 questions at the end of each section. Not the end of the world, but something that a lot of kids don't like. So something to keep in mind. Science section. So science doesn't exist on SAT. However, there are graphs and charts to interpret on SAT. They've stuck those into random sections now to kind of compete with ACT to go, look, we test the same things. ACT science section does not test your science knowledge. This is the most important thing. And it doesn't mean you're going to do well. It's hard. People really struggle with this section, but it is not testing like AP biology, right? It is testing your ability to interpret data, read graphs and charts, make assumptions and assessments based on information from an experiment. And in theory, any outside information they expect you to know should only show up on 2 questions, and it should be limited to middle school science. So no one loves hearing that because it's a hard section somehow, even given that. But if you are like they expect you to know gas, liquid, solid. They expect you to know the order of planets, which a lot of people forget. They expect you to know kind of random things like that. There are some terms that they want to make sure you know, even like velocity, right? But it's not trying to test high level stuff. So you will see stuff that looks like, oh, they're testing this really complicated chromosome thing from biology. Yeah, they're not. Like they're expecting you to look at the graphs and charts and interpret things. So again, only 2 questions can pull outside knowledge. The other 38 out of 40 are going to be, can you interpret the data and stuff in front of you? There's nothing beyond what's on the test to look at. So for those of you junior year, here's the big determining factor of whether you should be testing now or you want to wait a few months. Or again, if you're done, great, and it's Happy New Year. So if you are in Algebra 2, you definitely want to wait to test until kind of later in the spring, but you would want to wait to start prepping until 2nd semester, because the reality is 2nd semester, even though you're still learning Algebra 2, if you're in that class, you need it for these tests. That's the whole reason I'm mentioning that, which I should have led with. But if you're in Algebra 2, you still need to review pre-algebra, Algebra 1, geometry. You still need to relearn all of your grammar rules, all of these things. And when you're looking at what you're going to learn in Algebra 2 2nd semester, it's probably going to be enough to answer 2 or 3 questions. There's not that much Algebra 2 on these. So don't wait until the end of junior year to start testing and prepping, or the other way around, because you are going to find yourself in a position where it's going to stress you out. The applications are never as easy as people expect. If you have older kids or older siblings, you already know this. But the reality is it's so many more essays than people are anticipating. It's so much more time. You do not want to be doing test prep at the same time. So wrap up test prep by the end of junior year. Now, if you took Algebra 2 as a sophomore and you're in math analysis or whatever it is this year, then junior year, you are going to be, you could prep yesterday and start testing because you already know all the math that's on there. You still might need to review, still might need to go over grammar rules and strategies for reading and whatever it is, but you are ready to go. We always suggest you want to take it twice. 3 times is kind of the max. Beyond that, you're not usually going to improve. You've kind of done what you can do. 4th sitting is not really like you're taking it 4 times. It's more like if you start on a later sitting, you could always take it at the beginning of senior year, but please, please, please don't. Again, it stresses you out, and it also makes it harder to pick your college list, right? Because we see kids all the time who are like, well, I'm pretty sure I can get a 32, and we're basing a college list on this assumption, and the reality is they got it 27, right, on the ACT. That's not going to make a big difference. But one of the things here, actually going back one slide here, one of the things I always want to point out is that, you know, when you're deciding which tests to take, you can do this on your own. You don't need, candidly, you don't need test prep companies. If you want test prep companies, there's a lot of great ones. But the one big thing that I always really encourage is make sure if they're having you, or and some companies even do like a half SAT, half ACT. To me, that's not a great gauge because you're not paying attention to the endurance or the pacing of each section, which is sometimes the most relevant. So you kind of need, yes, it sucks, take a full SAT, take a full ACT, but make sure the number one mistake I see people make is they just compare the scores, make a choice and move on. So let's just say, looking at this chart, let's say you got a 1300 on the SAT, but you got a 26 or 27 on the ACT. If you look at this chart, it's like, whoa, the 1300 is better, right? But that doesn't mean you're going to improve more on the SAT. So what you need to do is break down the questions, what you're getting wrong and why. Is it that you don't like the way that the questions are worded on that test? Is it that you don't understand, you didn't remember that formula for math, you just need to brush up, or you never learned it, right? So understanding, because for instance, on the SAT reading section, I have kids all the time where even when we go over the right answer, they're like, I still don't get it. Still like my old answer. It's not a great sign for SAT because it means that you don't see the patterns or how they're asking questions. But just make sure that if you do this on your own, make sure you're going question by question what you're getting wrong, and ask yourself if you're seeing a pattern. If you're seeing like, oh, when they ask it this way, I see what they're doing, or actually that was pretty straightforward, that was a silly mistake. Make sure you're tracking that on each test. And if you're working with a company, make sure that they're actually helping you dissect these scores, not just giving you tests and saying this one's higher, go with that test. Because we see a lot of kids go down the wrong path for several months and then have to backtrack and try the other test, which is not ideal. Okay. So those of you who are starting to think about like college lists and where you want to go and what you want to do, these are terms that we always want. We had a webinar on creating a college balance or balanced college list, so I won't go too in depth on this, but the things to keep in mind, these are the terms that we use, is safety, target, and reach. I know a lot of high schools are starting to use likely as kind of halfway between safety and target. And so let's just go over kind of what those mean when I say it or somebody else says it. And everyone might have a slightly different meaning, but this is pretty consistent. Safety is where you're above average in terms of GPA and test scores if you have them. And it's the type of school, when I call something a safety for a student, I mean, the world is upside down and on fire if you don't get in. Like, you should get in. There is no real reason for them to reject you. A likely, which again, I didn't put on here because honestly, we don't use much, but I'm seeing it more other places. So I'll cover it today. It's more like you probably should get in, but there's no guarantee, right? Safeties are generally bigger state schools because bigger state schools have a kind of an average GPA. If you're above that, I mean, a perfect example, Oregon, which is a great school, but Oregon, it has a filter clearly, because I have kids who, once they apply, literally 3 days later, when they log on to their portal, it shows admitted. And I'm like, nobody read the essay. Like, it was just their GPA flagged something and they got in, right? So there are some where it's just straightforward. Likely is usually a smaller school or a slightly more competitive school where it's like, look, you're still above average, but it's not a school that always takes people who are above average for them, right? Or they might be looking for a certain type. Or again, if it's small, they may just not have room for you in that certain major or program that you're applying to. Target is where it's 50-50. So when we use the phrase target, we mean somewhere that you are similar to the average accepted applicant. So they accept kids with a 3.8 and a 1400 on the SAT. You have a 3.8 and a 1400. that's a target, right? You are what they generally accept. Some people interpret that to mean it's a safety because they always accept people like that. They don't always, that's an average. They accept some people higher, some people lower. And again, keep in mind, stats are kind of inching up in this test optional world across the board. More applicants. And this is the other thing for the more competitive schools that are test optional. Remember, not only are people applying with only those top scores within that range, but you have more kids applying and candidly kind of muddying the waters. So it gets harder for schools when they're used to getting 20,000 applications and now they're getting 30,000. It's harder for them to break through some of this and say, well, is this above average for us? Let's wait and see what else comes through. So target basically just means you're 50-50. Think of it that way. Reach schools. This is where you are below average in terms of GPA and test scores. So this just, and by the way, or one that has exceptionally low acceptance rates, which is candidly with top students, they're very rarely, like if you're in the top 10% of your class at Pally, you're almost certainly not below average in terms of GPA, many places, if any. And test scores, maybe, maybe not, but let's just assume you're not above average. You're average for Stanford, Harvard, Yale. We'll go with that to that group. But when you've got a 3 or 4% acceptance rate, everything is a reach or higher. We make up our own category of super reach, where I said like this is something where it's a shot in the dark, right? If you have a 3.8 and you're applying somewhere that generally takes kids with a 4.5, that's a super reach, especially if they have like a 4% acceptance rate. But recognize that again, when we talk about reaches, it's either just that competitive to get in and it's a reach for everybody, or you are below average for what they're looking for. It just depends on kind of what schools you're looking at and what you have. Okay, enough of kind of GPA test score stuff. Let's talk about the stuff where you really have more control, I think, at this point of how you're filling out your application and what's going to matter to colleges. So your extracurricular activities. So you can see here, the biggest piece of this pie is community impact. And this is the phrase I want you to really kind of process, because a lot of people talk about community service, right, or volunteer work, and they're related, but you can do volunteer work and like go clean up the beach or work at a soup kitchen or things like that. That's great. It doesn't necessarily mean you had a profound impact on your community, right? So community impact can be many, many different things. But a lot of times, this is a phrase that's also getting thrown around. I used to roll my eyes because I thought it was cheesy, but it is a phrase that's being used a lot these days, which is your passion project. So in an ideal world, your juniors, you have roughly a year to think about this. It's saying, if I could help somebody or something and make a difference in this world, how will I do it? What is the thing that drives me, right? It could be helping puppies. It could be veterans. It could be immigrants, it could be domestic abuse victims. Pick a thing that matters to you and find a way to help them. So if you've already been involved in volunteer work, if you've already been doing a fair amount of stuff and giving back and you know your cause, it's even better if you're kind of jumping off from that. Like if you're a National Charity League or National League of Young Men or any of those kind of charity groups where you've done a lot of random stuff, right? Maybe you did some tutoring, maybe you did some, animal shelter hours one weekend. You probably know which thing is the most kind of inspiring and fulfilling for you. Pick that thing and you're going to go one step further with whatever you do. So community impact, I always want you to think about as how are you affecting change? What void are you leaving behind when you leave and graduate, right? Whether it's Pally, whether it's your neighborhood, whether it's the state, whether it's the country, what have you done that is unique? It's not just joining a club, right? It's got to show some initiative. On that note, leadership comes in a lot of different forms. So I hear kids who are really focused on being a captain or president of something. And I get kids who are like so excited that they're the president of the car club, right? That's not bad. That's good. That's perfectly good. But did you have any community impact? Is your world a better place? Are your peers and classmates more prepared for life because you guys met for lunch once a month and you showed pictures of cool sports cars? Probably not, right? Yes, you were elected president or you created the club and became president. That's still good stuff, but make sure you don't get hung up in the titles. Back to community impact, that matters more. So if you're doing something on your own, by yourself, on a level that's almost leadership, you're taking initiative, you're doing it on your own, you're not following anybody. And even better is when you can do something on your own and have someone follow you, right? So maybe you decide you want to help this organization that you've identified, and you talk to your friends and you talk to your school, like, how can we help support them? How do we get people out? An example I always love to give about community impact is I had a student who during COVID, they'd spent, it was two brothers, and they'd spent time working at Habitat for Humanity's, like, I think it's called Regifting or Regoods, whatever it is, the store where they sell the furniture. And he used to work there. COVID shut everything down and they had nowhere else to go. So what the brothers did was they're like, well, how else can we help this organization? And they started seeing, you'll remember, like during COVID at the beginning, people were into this, kind of weird nesting phase where it was like, once you realize you're going to be there a while, everyone was making their houses lovely or their apartments lovely. And people were trashing a lot of furniture on the side of the road. So these brothers decided to start collecting the kind of trashed furniture, and they had woodworking skills and were good with their hands and had learned all these other things previously, and fixed up all the furniture to be able to donate. Since they couldn't be there to actually volunteer, they donated, but it was like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of furniture that they donated, but it was also unique, right? So it made an impact. They're both environmentally aware and focused on environmental issues as well, but it became something where it's like, you're helping the environment, you're helping something that you've already been committed to, right? They've already were involved with Habitat for Humanity, and they found a unique out of the box way to make a difference. That's what colleges want, right? One of those kids is going to MIT, the other one we'll see. But like that's what schools are looking for, is the community impact. So focus on that, if anything, above all else for activities. You can have impact on the basketball team. You can have impact in student government or debate or the robotics team, but those are sometimes a little bit different. This is just something to focus on. It can relate to your major. It doesn't have to, right? It can be very different. Notable accomplishments. I put this at 10% because most people candidly don't have them, which is totally fine. So think of honors and awards, or if you've won writing competitions, or if you are a mathlete and won a math competition, great. If you have, it can help. If you've won something big, it helps a lot. So, worked with students who won national writing competitions. That's big. If you're applying as a creative writing or film major or whatever it is that's in that realm, and you won something on a big scale, it changes things for you. It's proving to the college that they're not crazy. You are that good, right? Somebody else thinks so too. So when you're thinking of your extracurricular activities, you want to do things you love. You want to do things that you enjoy. Like, don't give up your childhood to just pad your resume. Do what you want to do, but keep these things in mind, because I see a lot of kids who just join 12 clubs, do very little, candidly, and are showing up to lunch meetings on occasion, and they think this is going to look great to colleges. Colleges want to know you had an impact. So think about that. All right, extracurricular activities and work experience. This is an example. This is a screenshot from the Common Application. So this is how much room you have to describe a single extracurricular activity. You'll notice you get one line for positions held, honors won, the name of the organization, stuff like that. And then the second line where it says activity, you have 150 characters to describe what you did in that activity. And one of the things I want to emphasize, kind of what we were just talking about, it's not what the club does. They don't, if you need to clarify what the club does, great, and make sure they understand it, but they don't care what the club does. They care what you've done, right? What's the impact you've made? Did you coordinate and organize a bake sale? Did you, trying to think, a lot of it's like, you think of raising money, but it could be that maybe you found, I had a girl who loved robotics and decided when she became president of the robotics team, she decided to pivot a little bit on where their focus was, and they started creating, we call it wheelchairs for shelter dogs. So those who couldn't use their hind legs, they built these, and the robotics team did that. She wrote about, obviously, that was her personal statement, but you could include this in the activity. What did you do? Think of it as a resume. Led this, organized this, created this, founded this. If it's just, I go to, Spanish club or Mexican food and eat tortillas and tacos, or French club and eat baguettes, no one cares, right? Like that doesn't mean that you joined a club and you did a thing once at a time, but did you coordinate French cooking lessons? Did you go out to a certain, part of town and practice your Spanish with everybody else in the club? Great, right? That's what matters, but it's what you initiated and what you kind of led. So focus on that. Notice they also ask hours per week, weeks per year, and which years you were involved. So this is why you don't want to just do something randomly, do it once and be done. You want to show consistency, right? So you need to be able to say as best you can as a junior, look, maybe you didn't do much freshman, sophomore year, been a little busy with COVID and everything. But if you didn't do much then, I want you to think about anything you're doing now, you want to continue senior year. And anything you did last year, if you can be continuing it in junior year, that's better, right? We want to give them as much consistency in what you do so it doesn't look like you're just bouncing around. Now, work experience. So another question we get a lot is like, is it better to get like a fancy internship or paid work, like at an ice cream shop or whatever? Look, it depends on what else you're doing and where you're applying and honestly what that internship might be. Like Boeing and SpaceX and some of those have amazing internships for kids. If you get accepted to one of those, you go do that. But if the option is like working in your aunt or uncle's law firm and making 25 bucks an hour to answer phones and be on your phone, then no, it doesn't show anything about you. If you get something through nepotism or through kind of, it's good experience, by the way, it's not to say disregard it, but it's not as impressive as people think. Because also if you're ever working for your parents' company, they see where your parents work on the application. And again, it kind of negates the validity. I always say, I was like, look, I worked for my dad in high school. He was way harder on me than anybody else. Every other employee never got yelled at when they were 1 minute late from lunch, but I did. So people can know that, like, look, working for a parent or a cousin or an aunt and uncle, whatever, or family friend even, is sometimes easier, sometimes harder, but they don't know. So if you can get something on your own merits and apply for it, and just like normal job application, that's great. Or use some connection that is not obvious, where if they Google the company, the last name of the owner isn't the same as yours, things like that. All right, so just pay attention. But I love the menial task type of tedious scooping ice cream, bagging groceries, Subway sandwich artist sort of stuff, right? You do those things. You're showing colleges that you're not spoiled. You're showing them work ethic. You're showing them trustworthiness, responsibility. I would say, if you can add that you had the keys to the store and you opened and closed, or you had the key to the cash register and did all this, it shows that somebody who is not necessarily related to you trusts you with their business and believes in you, and that you have clearly, at least as far as they can tell, been fired, and that you've clearly not been fired. You are in great shape and you're super reliable and responsible and mature. So I like that because it's also different, right? A lot of kids skip those types of jobs and try to go find things that are fancier, but they're looking for your character and your, again, work ethic and all of these things that it can be more nuanced than you think. It's not just what looks or sounds the most impressive. It's what speaks to your future success as an adult and a human being in society. So don't be afraid to go work retail or work as a hostess. I think, age, by the way, the age limits or requirements for certain jobs. First of all, different jobs have different limits or minimums, I guess. And also different city lines do. So I have kids all the time who will live in one place and say, well, I'm not allowed to work in a restaurant. And someone a county over is like, oh, I could, right? So just pay attention to that and look into that for anything you're interested in. And don't just give up if you're not old enough for something you want. Letters of recommendation. So this is another screenshot. This is what teachers are going to fill out about you. I print this out because as juniors, you need to be thinking about this now. You need to think about who you're going to ask to write your letters of rec. If you look at this, so there's two things I want to point out. One is the scoring system. So if you look at the top line, you've got below average, average, above average, well above average, top 10%, top 5%, or one of the top few I've ever encountered, right? Clearly, you want people who are going to give you more on the far right and say one of the best. But colleges also track the answers for different teachers at the same high school. So they will look at Mr. Smith and see how many times does he say one of the top few I've encountered. He says it all the time, no longer considering his opinion worth much. So you're not always, just don't think because they're writing a letter, they're gonna always put you in that category. They might, but likely they're gonna give you a variety, right? So looking at these, it's everything from your academic and intellectual capacity and capabilities and success, your how the faculty views you, how your peers view you, how you treat them. Do you show integrity? Do you bounce back from setbacks? Are you confident, right? Are you concerned with others? Do you help out? Are you involved in class? Do you raise your hand? Do you get involved in discussions? These are all the things that they're looking for. One of my favorite things which I always point out. So admissions rep at a top 10 university told me that they look at letters of recommendation, college essays to determine which of these kids they want their son or daughter to date or room with, which is hilarious because actually that person had no kids. But the idea, the sentiment behind it actually makes sense, right? Are you a good human being? Are you engaged? Are you going to be a good addition to their community? Do they want their other students hanging out with you? So with letters of recommendation, think about the teachers, not just the ones that you're getting an A in the class, but the ones who really you connect with, the ones that maybe you see or spend more time with outside of class. If they also happen to be the cross country coach or the yearbook advisor, and you're in those organizations, great. But if not, if it's just kind of a standard student teacher relationship, it's your job to stand out and make it easy for them to write you a good letter of rec and put you more on that far side, right? Because you don't want somebody who's like willing to write you a letter, but really hasn't much to say other than they're good in class. They don't talk much, but they seem to be a nice kid, right? There should be more to it. So make it easy for them to get to know you. You've got another 6-8 months, right? Use those wisely. And I hate to say schmooze, but kind of like if you have teachers that you're like, I think this is who I'm going to want to ask. I love this class. I love this teacher. Go in after class, talk about the material, again, raise your hand, get involved in the class discussions, show a genuine interest in the material, not just the grades, and let them get to know you as an individual so that, again, you're not the kid who got an A, but sat in the back of the classroom and never said a word. Those are not good letters of recommendation. So try to be a little proactive on that. So Common App essay prompts. So you're young, you don't need to worry about this yet, but I bring this up because the more brainstorming you can do in the next year, your life will be much easier. This is everything from tell us about a background, identity, or interest that you have. How have you kind of recount a time you faced a challenge, setback, or failure? Tell us about a time you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. Reflect on something that's made you so happy or thankful, but in a surprising way. Discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself and others. Topic, idea, concept you find so engaging you lose track of time, or topic of your choice, which the point of that is if you don't like 1 through 6, number 7 says write whatever you want. But back to that whole, you want to write something that makes them want their son or daughter to date or room with you. That's what needs to be in the back of your head with this. It should be giving them insight into who you are, what drives you. It should be a vulnerable topic on a certain level. You don't want to be like, I did this cool program and that's why I want to study business, right? It's not that. You have different essays for that. This is about what makes you tick as a human being, what matters, why do they want you in their community? And if you're going to tell them a story, the story has to have a point. And the biggest issue I see all the time is people whose essay doesn't have a point, right? They wrote a great story. It's a great short story, creative writing sample, but it doesn't tell colleges who you are today or why the story you just told them matters. So be thinking about as you go through the next year, I want you thinking of things like when something matters to you or resonates with you, whether it makes you really happy or sad or introspective, or you look at something and you're like, oh, it made you grow up, right? Then write it down. Get this stuff on the page and focus your efforts on coming up with a bank of ideas, because you're going to be super happy that you did. Even beyond the Common App essay prompts, you've got the personal insight questions for the UCs. You've got supplements for every college. So I shouldn't say every, there are some that don't have supplements. The vast majority do. So recognize that's one thing to point out. If you're on the Common Application and you're looking beyond this personal statement, most schools, again, I would say for what I see most kids apply to, you're looking at 90% of schools do not have essay, or sorry, the opposite. I said that wrong. 90% do have extra essays is where I'm going with that. So if you are looking at 10 colleges, the odds are you're going to have an extra 2 or 3 essays per school to write. So an extra 20 or 30 essays. Yes, sometimes there is overlap. Not as easy as you think, and it's not as often as you think. And colleges are coming up with more and more unique prompts to avoid that. They want their own thing. The most notoriously unique, if anybody's curious and wants to go see this, is the University of Chicago. They come up with the quirkiest essay prompts every year. And every year you can answer one of the new ones or the library of old prompts. But some of my favorites from the past have been like, where's Waldo? Or solve for X, or is gazpacho a soup or a smoothie? That's it. This is a top 10 university. They're looking for creativity. They're looking for like, do you think outside the box? Are you fun? Are you quirky? So a lot of schools are leaning more towards that. They kind of started this trend. And I've seen a lot more schools this year that are asking kind of quirky questions. I saw one really competitive school that asked, do you want to have kids? Why or why not? Which at first seems ridiculous. And then you stop and think about it, it's like, oh, okay, this actually gives you a view. Like, are you cynical and thinking the world's going to crap and why have kids? Do you have an answer that's selfish about how it'll be fulfilling to you? Like, there's a lot of interesting questions out there. So the more you brainstorm on this sort of thing of like what matters to you, what drives you, you're going to have unique concepts, but some essays you can't plan for. It's just, you got to answer the question. All right. So miscellaneous factors. So this is something, again, the percentages I almost say disregard, because it depends on how good you are at something, right? So athletic recruitment I have is only 20%, but if you're one of the best, quarterbacks in the country and you're going to be a top recruit at a D1 school, that matters more than art portfolios, right? Or whatever it is that else we've talked about, or even your grades, candidly, to a certain extent. But if you're applying to a highly competitive academic school, athletic recruitment can make the difference of you getting in or not getting in. If you're so I always say, I have a ton of kids, we work with a ton of kids who play sport and are a good student and go to the Ivy League, right? So if you're looking at some of these amazing schools, you have to be a really good athlete and a really good student. You don't have to be exceptional at both, because exceptional at both rarely actually exists. Usually it's a little bit one or the other. So I have kids who played at Dartmouth who are like AB students and have a couple APs, right? But we're really good at volleyball or really good at basketball or whatever the sport was. So athletic recruitment can really kind of change the stats for every kid. So do recognize if you're on the fence, that can play a big factor, but you have to be good enough and you have to be communicating with the coaches and understanding their timeline. If you're interested in that, hopefully you did the webinar on athletic recruitment, but understanding kind of the factors that coaches are looking at and how admissions plays a role. Remember, a coach can love you, but admissions still needs to want you too. So it has to go through both. Portfolios and auditions. So this is similar to athletic recruitment. If you are applying as an art major to a great art school, or you're applying as a film major at USC, right? These types of programs, your portfolios, or if you're an actress or a singer, your auditions, things I call them talent-based majors, right? Where it's about your skill in a specific thing. That matters a ton. They don't care if you're going to be, an opera singer, what level math you took as a senior matters far less. Right. So, but you have to be an incredible opera singer. So portfolios and auditions can carry a ton of weight. If you're just an average kid applying in, like we were talking about at the beginning, you're like, I'm a decent artist. I'll send in my portfolio for fun and show I'm well-rounded. Great. That's maybe a thumb on the scale of like, oh, this kid's well-rounded. Cool. But it's not going to make a huge difference. So it just depends on what your major is, where you're applying, and how good you are. High school reputation relationship. This one, look, Pally's great. The reality though is this is not always tied to the high school itself. It's tied to the students who came before you, who went to these colleges. So just like we were talking about, this influences why schools maybe go back to test required as opposed to test optional. It's oftentimes that kids that they accepted didn't do as well as they had hoped. Same thing for high schools, right? So if your dream college accepted or took 5 kids from Pally last year and they're there and they're all flunking out, doesn't make Pally look good. Even if they were prepared and they're just partying too hard, the college is making a correlation, right? But it goes the other way. So if your students are well prepared and are going to colleges and doing an awesome job and doing great at those schools, they're more likely to take more Pally kids down the line. So there are relationships that you candidly will never be aware of. And by the way, there's always schools, I always hear these schools that have this insane, it's almost like I don't even know, weird disconnect with a college where there's a private school in LA that has now gone 20 years without anybody getting accepted to Duke. No idea why. They get kids into the Ivies and to Stanford and, Northwestern and Vanderbilt, not Duke. So every once in a while, and those poor kids, I'm like, look, if Duke's your top choice, you're just kind of out of luck. At some point it'll break. We can keep trying, but it's an uphill battle that you don't need to climb, right? So, or fight. So just be aware that there are some things out of your control. Naviance helps you get a sense of this, like compared to the national average. Is Pally's average higher or lower? How many kids do they generally seem to take in a year? That information it helps you, but there's also candidly stuff that's just behind scenes that you don't know. And in part, I tell you this because it factors into the decisions colleges make in a way that you'll never know, right? So some kids are like, I just didn't have enough, like high enough test scores or enough APs, or I didn't do enough volunteer work. It could just be this. Maybe you were a perfectly great candidate, but they are mad at your school. Again, I don't know of any that. I think Pally's awesome and has great relationships, but I've seen enough of these things. I had a kid a couple of years ago that ended up breaking an ED agreement, the early decision agreement at a college. That college called the high school because the high school has to vouch for you when you sign an ED agreement and say you won't break it. And they didn't. They were like, we're done with you guys. Like, we're not taking any more of your kids. All right. So anyway, so there's stuff in the background that you don't know about. And that's, the beauty of Naviance and your amazing college center, and whether it's us or somebody else, like having that information to be able to walk you through the likelihood based on where you're at, what you're studying, is all of that jazz. Interview. I only put it 10%, but it's on there. It doesn't usually carry much weight. So it's usually like, it's not about, if you're a horrifically bad interviewer, it can probably hurt you. If you're amazingly good, it might help you a little bit. But this is, and for those of you parents who interview for your alma maters, and if you're an alum, you'll know firsthand that there's plenty of times that you recommend somebody you thought was awesome and they don't get in. Admissions doesn't listen to you. So alumni interviews don't carry that much weight, but what they do carry is evidence of your enthusiasm and commitment to this school. So most interviews are optional, right? The vast majority of schools tell you it's optional. You don't have to apply for an interview. It's totally cool either way. It's not cool either way. If you're interested in the school, sign up for the interview, no questions asked. You just need to do it. It shows you're putting the effort in, shows you care enough, you did your homework, you didn't miss a deadline, you're good. Now, if the interview is with somebody in the Office of Admissions, which some smaller schools still do, it's rare, but it does happen. If you are interviewing with somebody in admissions, then it does carry more weight. So make sure that is somewhere where you can kind of mess yourself up, or you can get yourself in a position where they love you and you're probably a shoo-in. So if you see interviews as an option, big state schools almost never do them. There are a couple weird exceptions. Sometimes they're more program specific, but just always check and Google the heck out of it. Make sure you're always looking at the pages from the school you're applying to, and you're good. Social media. So this is kind of, we'll start with your social media and then we'll talk about demonstrated interest, which also includes theirs. So colleges look, it's like 80-something% of colleges now look at kids' social media. So they look at applicants. If there's any reason, especially that they think you weren't committed to studying, but even so, they look for social media accounts, which why not? It gives them context. They see you in a way that you're not necessarily always trying to present yourself in the best light. They're getting a more authentic view of who you are. So you have a few options. Most of my kids just want to hide it and make it a private profile. Be careful. A lot of private settings actually are, if a friend of a friend can see you. A lot of colleges are followed by a student. So if you're friends with somebody who happens to attend a college, there's a chance the college can then use that relationship to see your application. So, or your profile. So there's that. But you can also, so you can hide it, you can ignore it. You can not have one. I know, I mean, it's crazy and I love it, but there are some kids with no social media accounts. You can keep it that way. Or you can tailor it to be a fabulous online photo journey of your life and why you're so great, right? So if you make it public and everything is you with your family at dinner, smiling, laughing, looking like a good kid, working with your siblings, or shooting basketball with your younger sister, and then pictures of you at Habitat for Humanity with your hard hat and shovel. All of those things are great. It makes you a better applicant. They are going to see it and they're going to like it. But a lot of kids don't want to mess up their social media for a year. And so it's up to you, but I would say it's worth it if you're open to it. You're giving them more positive information, right? And you're making it harder for them to say no because you're giving them more good information. Demonstrated interest is, there's a couple terms that, well, all right, let's talk about the technical demonstrated interest. So if you Google, I think it's college data, I think is common data set, I believe is what they call it. But if you look, you can see is demonstrated interest factored into college decisions. So here's the deal. If it says demonstrated interest considered, that means that formally they care if you, and again, if you are financially able to, they care if you have visited, have you come, sat in on a class, done the info session and tour. They are tracking your interest in the school to see how sincere it is. If they can look at your finances and know that that's not possible and that you're not able to fly across the country to go visit a ton of schools, which is a lot of people, most people, if that's the case, they need to see that you're doing online info sessions and tours. That's the one good thing that came out of COVID, right? You can do a lot of things virtually now. So if you can't fly to Ann Arbor to go visit University of Michigan, do all of their online stuff, right? Look at it, follow their social media, sign up for their email accounts, right? Anything that, or sign up with your email address to get emails from them and track these things. So they are looking at whether you open the emails, whether you click on links, all of that stuff. So you want to be in a position that when you apply, they can look and be like, oh, she signed up for our emails a year ago, right? And has been reading everything we've sent her. That speaks volumes to how committed and excited you are about Michigan. Now, why does that matter? Keep in mind, a phrase yield is how many kids that a school, a college accept them back and agree to go, right? So the higher the yield, the higher their ranking. As we talked about those, US News World Report, Forbes, a big factor is the yield. So do people who they accept them? Demonstrated interest is a good way for colleges to get a sense of whether you're actually going to attend. If you've never done an info session online, you've never signed up for an email, or you have, but you never opened them, never visited, never done these things, they have a good sense that you're not actually that interested in the school. So you have a year. This is awesome. Use it anywhere you think you're interested in. Go do your stuff, right? Go sign up for things, go watch things. The sooner you do it, the better, because you can always do it again as it gets closer to applications, and it shows more initiative and that you're more proactive and more excited than they even thought. Now, the reason I was saying like technical demonstrated interest, that's technical, where they're actually weighing it as a factor in admissions. The challenge here, and what frustrates me, is that there are schools out there that say we do not consider demonstrated interest. Fair. But they are still looking at your familiarity with the area. So upstate New York, you're applying to any upstate New York schools. There are there are colleges that will say, we don't care if you visited or done online tours or info sessions or whatever it is. We just want to know that you're excited about the school and your essays speak for themselves. But then they will also say behind closed doors that the reality is, if you've never visited, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. You're coming from Los Angeles and you're going to be in the middle of nowhere. It's going to be freezing cold with no big city nearby. They're going to be worried about your commitment because you don't necessarily know what life is going to look like on that college campus. So I find it misleading, some of the schools that say they don't consider demonstrated interest, because they are oftentimes still factoring in how aware are you of what you're getting into. Because once again, if you've never visited somewhere that's snowy and isolated and dreary, and you come from Los Angeles, they're afraid that you'll probably go somewhere sunny and happy and better weather, right? And more city life. So demonstrated interest, I think it's safer and healthier to assume all colleges consider this. It just puts you in the right mindset of proving your enthusiasm everywhere you go. All right. So you're juniors, but I want everybody to look ahead to senior year for a moment and kind of be aware of what's coming up next. So August 1st, most applications open. So you're going to have everything. So you want to start essays before this. We strongly recommend, with the students we work with, we want starting essays, if not June, then definitely July, and getting as much done as you can before this opens, because then all the supplements are announced. So you can still work on, your UC application, like the personal insight questions, your personal statement, description of activities. There's a lot to do in July if you do it. August 1st, then you start filling this stuff out. Again, your supplemental stuff. If you're applying for need-based aid, FAFSA form opens October 1st. It is generally first come, first serve for money. So you want to do more of that up front as you can. Don't wait until the end to do FAFSA. Do it as quickly as possible in October. Early action and early decision deadlines. When possible, if you are a good candidate, so let's just say you're a straight A student, you've always had A's, you've had good test scores, you have activities, you should apply early action everywhere you can. It just means you're acting early. You still have till May 1st to make a decision. So even if they get back to you in December or January, you don't owe them an answer until you owe every other school an answer. But early decision gives you the biggest bump. And that's something I know we addressed in another webinar, but the reality is, if you do early decision, look, and so I should preface that some schools, it doesn't matter as much. The super, super, super competitive schools, it doesn't make a big difference. But if you look at Northwestern, you look at University of Chicago, you look at WashU St. Louis, you look at these types of schools, these are schools that are used to losing top candidates to the Ivies. So this early decision, the binding option, proves to them that they are truly your favorite. You're not going to ditch them and go to Harvard if you get into Harvard. They have your commitment, and it makes your odds much higher. Also, early decision in particular, but even early action to an extent, they're taking who they want to take. They're picking who they like, who they think will be good for their school. Regular decision is where they are considering, how do we round out our class? Right. And that's everything from, we have too many history majors, no more history majors. So you might be the best history major they see, but they're not going to accept you because they already took a ton of history majors ED, right, and early. It could also be that they need more, you think of kind of the box checking when you're dealing with the application. to everything from race and ethnicity and religion and gender identity. All of these things factors which countries, which states, all of this factors in to regular decision far more than it does early. So that's why early is better, is you're kind of hedging your bets a little bit and letting them pick you if they like you. The only exception, the people who should not apply early are the kids who junior year, second semester, your grades dip. So if, again, we want the trend to do this in high school. If it falters and you go down or you have not a great semester, you need first semester senior year to show it was a fluke. So you would not probably want to apply early anywhere unless it's a complete safety, because you want the time to show them that you're going to be okay and that you turned it around, you had a bad teacher or a bad semester, but you're back on the horse, right? And you're doing great. So early action, early decision, again, hopefully, like, we're in the throes of it right now because most kids have a ton of schools that are due in early November. So this is seniors panic mode right now, right? They're applying for all everything, submitting everything, and that's good. And then you breathe easier for the remaining parts. November 30th, your UCs and Cal States are due. December 1st is priority deadline for scholarships and financial aid. A lot of places, some are a little earlier, some are later, but the majority are December 1st. Regular decision deadlines, I said January 1st to 15th. There are some exceptions, like Michigan is actually February 1st. Arizona is like May 1st or June 1st. It's super late. So everywhere's different, right? But that's the bulk of them are going to be in January. And then colleges need to release the results by April 1st. IVD sometimes comes a couple of days later. And then May 1st, you have to make a decision. So I also tell you this, so that when you're looking at senior year spring break, keep it empty. You're going to be visiting colleges, because unless you did ED, which you would have already known by that point, by the way, falls at the same time as Coachella. I point this out because every year we end up having students who are having meltdowns that they have to miss Coachella to go visit colleges. Just accept that you can go other years. But this is your chance. This is the time that you need to go really consider things. The more you can do up front, the better. But if you get into 3 top schools and you're not sure where you want to go, especially if you never got to visit them before you applied, that's your April senior year. So that's it. That is your junior year in a nutshell. I'm looking ahead a little bit. If you have questions, as always, you know where to find me. You're welcome to reach out and do a 30-minute little one-on-one consultation. But what questions do we have? I see we've got a few.
Yes, we do have a few. The first question is about AP classes. They said, is it harmful to not take an AP exam? So for example, if you're taking 4 AP classes and you choose to only take 3 exams if you're not doing great in the 4th class?
Okay, so I think it depends if that's the reason. So if you're doing poorly in a class, look, it's not great. I mean, I would still encourage you in theory to take all of them and hope it goes well. And then you can decide whether you want to submit it or not. But if there's a strong reason, or, there's stuff going on in the personal life that's really getting in the way, it's not the end of the world. It's not ideal. Again, colleges want to see those AP scores. So not even taking it gives you no chance to give them what they're looking for.
All right. And the next question is there an SAT score that is considered outstanding or that you should generally strive for?
So that is totally dependent on where you're applying. So what I would say is, again, if you're looking at top 25 schools, definitely top 10, but top 25, you want a 34 or you want a 1500 or higher, especially the test optional schools. So again, the irony is that the schools like required, Georgetown's average has kind of dropped a little bit in the last couple of years for test score average, which is a good thing for applicants. But then again, you look at MIT, or you look at, not MIT, Caltech was test blind, they don't care. But you look at any other schools like a Northwestern, Vanderbilt, and Duke, who does consider it, those SAT scores, like that's the minimum that anybody's really submitting. So you need that. If you are applying to schools that are more, again, top 50, top 100, it really just depends. You can look, I would look school by school, because you can see what their average ranges are. And outstanding 34 and 1500, you will submit to literally every college, right? But even a 33 or a 1470, there are schools in that, especially top 10 group, that we would not submit that to. You would be on the low end of who's sending scores. So hopefully that answers that.
Awesome. And the last question that we have is, how much is legacy still a factor? So for example, does it help at a school like USC?
Okay, so you're not gonna like this answer. Not as much, well, maybe a lot of you might like this answer, others may not like it at all. Not much is the reality. There are some schools where it carries more weight. USC, candidly, is not really one of them. It does affect it for Trojan transfer plan and having options down the line. So it's not a flat out rejection. It's you can go to community college or go elsewhere, transfer, and they try to leave more options open for students who are the kids of alumni, right? So if you're a legacy, you're less likely to get completely shut out. You're more likely to have options. Legacy matters a lot less at most schools than connections, which are not the same thing, right? So if your parent went to school but doesn't know anybody who has any clout there, doesn't really donate, buildings, and isn't super involved in the school at this point, legacy is more of a thumb on the scale for a lot of colleges. Meaning, if it's you with somebody and up against somebody who's identical from a GPA test score activities, you guys have done the exact same things, and you're a legacy, you're going to be the one likely to get in as opposed to the other person. But if you're less competitive in any way, you will not get in over somebody else with legacy many places. This changed a few years ago with the whole scandal because, and by the way, there's talk from a legal standpoint, and you might be following some of the stuff going on with all the lawsuits, and Supreme Court's considering all the stuff with Harvard and, discrimination against Asians, and should race factor into college admissions. Here's the thing. People who don't want race to factor in generally want legacy to factor in, and vice versa, right? If one goes, they both go. So there's all these articles out there that are like, look, if we take race out of admissions, legacy is going to disappear because it's only fair, right? If you're saying we've got to take it on merit, not race, not anything with diversity, then legacy is going to be the next to go. So I only bring this up because what can happen in a year with the current political climate, with just score like COVID and all the changes to colleges, legacy is carrying less and less weight overall. If you are a legacy and you're remotely involved in your alma mater, the best thing you can do for your kid is take them to events, let them get to meet people, learn about the school. Maybe you'll meet somebody who is in admissions or on the board of trustees, or somebody who can either vouch for them or get them in front of people. So there are a lot of colleges that don't do interviews, right? If you look at their on the website, no interviews. But if you're a legacy with connections at your school, they will make exceptions. One of the shocking ones to me is Berkeley. So Cal, I've had quite a few legacies. Parents were well connected and stayed very involved in the school that got an offer to do an interview with the head of admissions. It is a favor to involve legacies, or not legacies, sorry, alums for their kids. So that's the way to use legacy more than anything. It's less so about just being a legacy. Anything else?
Perfect. That's all we have.
I love it. All right, guys, thanks for joining us tonight for the rest of the webinar series. It's been awesome. We had a blast, and feel free to reach out with any questions, and have a good rest of your night.